Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Everybody's popping in. I'm Dr. Melanie Reese. I'm the director of Cadre. On behalf of all of us here at Cadre, we are immensely excited to share this topic with you all today. I've been so giddy about this coming up. I've been very, very happy about it. Hardly wait for this to get started. Today's panel presentation is another in our continuing series of valuable Cadre webinars archived and available on our website. So why storytelling? So we all remember our first love. No matter what comes after, we always, remember it holds a special place in our hearts. For those who don't know my story, before I came to be the director of Cadre and before I was a dispute resolution coordinator for a state agency, I had another professional life. I was a communication professor for about 20 years. The field of communication was my first love. I loved theories of communication. I loved the explanations of what worked and why communication often didn't work, and how absolutely complex communicating with other people was. I earned a PhD in this stuff, and after decades of study and years of teaching, I can tell you with absolutely uncertainty all the things I don't know. And I can tell you what I do know. One thing I do know is that communication is messy. It is not a science. It is not exact. It is a negotiation, always. Some people are really good at it. Other people, in fact, most of us struggle with communication. I've taught hundreds of people the process of conflict negotiation, conflict management, and mediation over the years. Mediation is the process of helping others navigate through resolving conflict with others. And for some people, being a mediator, it just clicks. They get it. It's like an art for them. They get it. And for some people, it just doesn't click. They don't have it. They can follow the steps. They can cookbook it like a recipe, but they have no feel for it. And those students would get frustrated. And they would ask me, what makes somebody a good mediator? Not just a cook, but a chef level mediator. And it always came down to one thing. You have to, in the moment, be interested in other people's stories. It really is about being into the story. You have to be able to sort through the messiness and zero in on the critical parts. You have to highlight them, you have to validate them, and you have to show the story to the other person. And then you have to do the same thing for the other. And then you have to weave those stories together into a new story that has hope for resolution. And the story is the communication. That's where communication is really beautiful. The act of making sense is really what conflict resolution is all about. Whether we're talking about telling our own story to persuade, or helping others to share their story so that we can identify issues to help resolve a conflict, storytelling and listening to stories is at the heart of it all. To be effective in this field, we must connect with other people's stories. We will be better at engaging others in conflict if we can share our stories in a way that help others hear them. And we can help others better when we can empathize with them and help them tell their stories, even when we don't agree with their behaviors or their interpretations. But I like this little spool here. There's a lot that gets wound up in that spool, both in the telling of the stories, the messiness of it, and in our translation of them as we try to make sense of them. As people are living their story in their world with their life experience and their challenges and their history and their trauma and their joys and their mood and their health, they don't share their whole story. And really, they shouldn't. It's theirs, it's personal. And we don't have access. We're not privy to their whole story. But that doesn't stop us from trying to figure them out. We're always trying to figure out and guess about other people and just trying to understand, hey, what's their story? as we try to walk through this world. Which brings us to another tidbit from the world of communication, that we are constantly trying to create meaning, and we act based upon the meaning that we create. And this gets us into trouble when we only have a little bit of the story, or we have the story wrong. Which is why storytelling is critical to productive conflict management. While I'm walking around with my story, and you're walking around with your story, and we're both making up stories about what the other person's story is because we're trying to guess what's going on, that's the world we live in. And that's why some form of storytelling is an element of every conflict intervention model that I've studied, be it from Western culture, Eastern cultures, indigenous cultures, or religious traditions. And here's one theory of why that's true. When a person shares their story in a shared environment, and another person shares their story in the same environment, they're creating a new story together. And weaving of the story together, maybe with a skilled third party helping them guide the construction, offers an opportunity to create a common space to build toward resolution. So this is laying the groundwork for our panelists today. Today, we've invited 4 esteemed individuals to share with you their understanding of storytelling from their perspectives and the potential it has in conflict engagement. You may have met our first panelist, Kiran Singh Sarah, a keynote speaker from Cadre's October Symposium. Kiran is the past president of the International Storytelling Center. He's a lovely person with a rich history and an infectious spirit. Next, we're honored to welcome longtime friends of Cadre, Diana Oten, Senior Director of Organizational Capacity Building for the SPAN Parent Advocacy Network, and recent recipient of the Anita Ingalls Keys to Access Award. Joanne Blades, Program Manager for the Oklahoma Special Education Resolution Center, CERC, and one of 4 states recognized in Cadre's exemplar initiative, showcasing high-performing state special education dispute resolution systems. And Mark Perchin, Principal of Perchin Consulting, who's been a regular presenter at many of our symposia and a longtime collaborator on numerous projects, including our Working Together series facilitator guide. So with that, it's my honor to introduce first Mr. Kiran Singh Sarah. Thank you, Kiran.
Thank you, Melanie. You all can hear me okay? Yeah, good. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Namaste, y'all, from this East Tennessee mountains. It's a pleasure to be with you all and in fellowship with you all. Now, we're here today to talk about and explore the potential for storytelling and conflict engagement and building relationships. And I've got a few questions to start off with. And maybe you could just raise your hands. And I'm not going to be able to see all the boxes, but how many of you consider yourselves to be storytellers? Okay, thank you. How many of you are fans of Dolly Parton? Come on, everyone. Now, just for a moment, I also want you just to briefly close your eyes. And I want you to think of a concern or an issue, local, national, or global, that is tugging at your heart right now. Why is that? Not necessarily blame a politician or blame a person, but what's behind that? What is the issue? And what personal value is in conflict with it? Okay, thank you. Now, there's an idea that the greatest force in the universe is the power of thought, and story is the greatest way to communicate that thought. Storyteller Kevin Kling says that storytelling is like 2 wings of a bird. One is the storyteller and the other is the listener, but we need both to fly. Alex Haley, East Tennessean, Appalachian, author of Roots, said that without storytelling, we'd have no roots. Irish storyteller Pat Speed says a story is the shortest distance between 2 people. Now, these are poetic ideas, but also science backs it up. Storytelling is also a truly democratic art form. For the people, of the people, by the people. It's an art that belongs to each and every one of us. In the storytelling tradition, we have a metaphor of sharing the fire. When our ancestors first came together and shared those stories, passed on those oral traditions, and passed those stories down through generations. But I believe storytelling started before then. It started when our ancestors looked up into the sky, saw the stars, and began to use their imagination. Because imagination is the birthplace of stories. It's a call and response tradition. It's also a shared experience. And storytelling, and I'm a peace builder as well as a storyteller, and I believe that storytelling, like peace building, are nebulous movements. We can't always see the direct results. They can occur over many years, but that doesn't mean they aren't working. It's a continual conversation. And we often talk about storytelling for social change, but what story is social change. Every time we listen to a story, we are changed in some way, whether we realize it in that moment or later. So why story? I want to begin with a folk tale because I love folk tales. And this one is called The Story About Stories. Now, once there was an old woman who was bent over, nearly broken by time. And she wandered into a small village and she went to the first door that she came across. And she knocked on the door and the door opened just a creak. And she looked up at the person who answered and she said, "Please, I'm tired and hungry. Could you spare some food?" And a man looked down and said, "I'm sorry, times are tough. We barely have enough food for our own family." And he went to shut the door, but she stopped it. And she said, "If you have no food, perhaps a place to spend the night. I have nowhere to sleep." And he said, "I'm sorry, we barely have enough room for our own family." And with that, he shut the door on her. So she went to the next house and then to the next house and then the next house. And then each house in the village, she received the same response until she finally resigned to her fate. She climbed up a hill, found a tree, and spread out her things to spend the night under that tree. Now, as she was about to fall asleep, she noticed a stranger coming into the village, and she watched as the stranger went to the first house that she tried at, knocked on the door, and no sooner had the door open than the stranger was welcomed in. It was this thought that haunted her as she tried to sleep through the night. And when she got up in the morning and gathered her meager belongings, she saw that the stranger was exiting the house. So she rushed down the hill to meet him, and she said, excuse me. I have to know, what is your secret? I try every house in the village, but everywhere turn me away. But you try one house and immediately you're welcomed in. What's your secret?" The man looked down at the old woman and could see that she was tired, and that she had lived a hard life. And he said, "When people look at you, they know they're looking into the future, what will come." And she looked up at the young man and saw that he was beautiful. He said, "When they look at me, they see what they hope they can be." The woman said she understood that was the way of the world. And the man said, "But I have an idea. Why don't we travel together? And whenever we come to a new village, you will simply hide within my cloak. And that way we will both gain entrance." The woman thought this was a great idea. And she said, "Thank you. What is your name?" And he said, "My name is Story." And she said, "Thank you, Story. My name is Truth." So from that day on, wherever they went, truth could be found hidden within stories. Now, story's job isn't necessarily to always master truth, but to help us welcome in the truth. And I believe there is no such thing as a fictive narrative if the story holds truth for the teller. Story, like people, carry multiple truths simultaneously. And our job is to listen in ways that can help reveal those truths. What is hidden or overlaid? What is meaningful to people's lives to enact social change? Some years ago, I met a man in New York City, in Brooklyn, in a restaurant, and he was from Sierra Leone. And he told me that in his traditional village in Sierra Leone, the word for medicine is story. If any of you are familiar with Marshall Ganz's work, The Story of Self and The Story of Now, it's something that I use a lot in my own works, particularly in social movement building. And I think we're all part of this social movement building in what we do. The idea that story of self is a story of home, connection, values, the stories that perhaps we grew up with, that changed our life in some way, our mentors and our teachers, the lessons that we learn. The story of us is the collective, could be a nation, could be an organization, could be a mission. It could be us today, right here in this moment. And the story of now is a story that's perhaps in conflict with that value. When we think about how we want to use our personal narratives to weave for social change, it's about how we perhaps use our story of value to connect to us, to help communicate to others our values, and hopefully reach their values too. Not to impose an idea, but to help connect with an idea of a value and a lesson that's from the heart. I asked you a question about Dolly Parton, Tennessee's greatest storyteller, if our nation and our queen. But we think about Dolly, why do we love Dolly so much? It's not just because of her music, not just because of her storytelling, it's her life. She grew up in the shacks in these mountains right here in the Smoky Mountains in poverty. She followed her dream and she went to Nashville, which was a big deal back then. She made it big. She made it popular. She became famous, world famous. But then she always remembered home and she gave back to her home, both figuratively and physically. She founded the Imagination Library. She funded the vaccine. We love her, but not just because of what she expresses in her art, but who she is, the story of her life, her journey. Some would call it the hero's journey. I like to think of it as the shero's journey. We also have sheroes and heroes in our lives. Emma Gonzalez, a young high school student that witnessed the murder through gun violence of her friend, and through that transformation, used that moment to advocate for gun reform. Malala Yousafzai, that received a bullet to the head by the Taliban, and now works to empower girls and women all over the world. Greta Thunberg, Sweden. You remember the image when she stand with that banner and that placard. She overcame those obstacles and she inspired a global movement. They are the story of change. It isn't just about the past or the present, it's the story that we wish to become and envision for our world. And sometimes it can take a lifetime. Every day is practice. I want to challenge you to also think about, to get rid of the elevator pitch when we think about storytelling. It went out in the 80s. An example of that, my grandmother, the proud matriarch that she was for our family, she grew up in the rural villages of northern India. She was from a farming and carpentry background, and her siblings took on the world's largest empire and defeated them. When she told stories of me growing up as a kid, she would sit on the couch and I would sit on the floor. And if I had said to my grandmother, "Grandmother, tell me your story in 3 minutes, give me the elevator pitch," I would have got a slap, rightfully so. We always have to do justice to the full story that needs to be told. And that requires listening, and every person has one. I want to give an example of a talk where I've used the story of self, us, and now. The personal, the collective, and the now. And this is a talk, it's about 5 to 10 minutes long, but it's a talk I gave a few years ago in my local park. And it was called Lights for Liberty. And it was during a time when children and families were being detained at the US and Mexico border. I think you remember that moment, that time. And I knew when I was asked to give this talk, I ran an institution, the International Storytelling Center, and I had to always be careful of what political topic I'm getting involved in. As the son of refugees, I knew I couldn't refuse. So I spoke solely as a personal individual. This is the talk. And what I want you to do when I share this talk is listen for where I use the story of self, where I use the story of us, and when I use the story of now. The personal, the collective, and the issue intention. How am I appealing to people's values? Remember, when I went to that talk and that vigil, I realized when I wrote this, I wasn't necessarily speaking to the people at that vigil. I was speaking to the newspapers and TV cameras, the people at home, because I knew this issue was, they were grappling within their own hearts too. It was tugging at their values. I want to thank our organizers, Sam and Debbie, for reaching out to me and for believing I have something to offer you today. Along with our other speakers, I am honored to share this space with you all. My name is Kiran Singh Sirar, and I'm the president of the International Storytelling Center in Jonesboro. I'm also a proud immigrant to this great country. My home now is here in Tennessee. However, as you can tell by my accent, I'm not originally from here. I was born and raised in England. I'm here tonight not as the representative of my organization or some political group or even my home country. I'm here tonight as a person who has worked in peace building since I was a child. And I want to tell you more about that. But first, I want to start with a happy story, a good memory, about the first time I came to America. This story somehow encapsulates what this country is to me. It was 1988 and I was 12 years old. My brother was 16. We were here for the first time with my mum and dad, who had saved for years for one of those classic American vacations. We went to Disney World and had our picture taken with Mickey Mouse. We went to SeaWorld and met baby Shamu the whale. And of course, we went to New York City, where my father took us to see the Statue of Liberty. My mother and brother stayed at the bottom, while me and my dad took an elevator to the halfway point and then walked up the stairwell towards the top. It was a long way for a kid, but when we finally got in front of the window inside her crown, we looked out onto America. And realized we had left the camera at the bottom with my mum. This was before cell phones. But luckily, a kind Chinese American man, an immigrant, said he'll take a photo with his own camera and send it to us. Some weeks later, after we returned to the UK, we received the photo in the mail. My parents were immigrants, just like the man with the camera, not to the US, but to England, the country that they landed in after fleeing genocide in their home country. They went there with nothing, unless you count my big brother. He was just a toddler. It was 1972, and my family had been forced to flee Uganda by a fascist dictator called Idi Amin that threatened to kill my family and people that looked like us. It was in the middle of a British winter, and when they landed in England, they were given 48 hours to leave their home. And they did not have anything warm to wear. Not unlike now, there was a terrible anti-immigrant wave happening across the UK. In fact, Nazi groups, skinheads, green bomber jackets, DM boots and white laces had stormed the airport in London and sworn to attack any refugees who landed on site. Some planes were forced to divert. My parents sought refuge in a tiny coastal town called Eastbourne, about 50 miles south of London, right next to the sea. I was born there 4 years later. Many people in Eastbourne welcomed my parents, offering them gifts of food and record albums. They taught my family about Christmas and Easter eggs and fish and chips, to which my parents insisted on adding masala spices. These small but powerful acts of kindness, the townspeople, swift actions and welcoming spirits helped my family overcome the grief of having to leave their home. But there would always be the problem of having to deal with some British people who felt like they hadn't earned their place. For me growing up, it was sometimes hard to be different. There are people in the world who teach that difference should be feared, not celebrated. A racist politician called Enoch Powell used his platform to demonize immigrants, which gave permission to attack immigrants. And one of those neo-Nazis I described knocked me off my BMX bike when I was 5 years old. And if you look closely at my face, you will notice 26 stitches on my face. I remember that day, waking up and seeing my mother. When I asked her what had happened, she told me about how a white person, an older woman, had seen what happened, carefully picked me up off the street and brought me home. Despite the realities of racism, I understood from an early age that diversity and multiculturalism aren't things to fear. They are things to celebrate. If you try to imagine a garden with one breed of flower, or imagine visiting a forest with one kind of bird, it's almost ridiculous. It takes different kinds of people to truly make a place. Sounds very romantic, right? But that's actually a lesson upon which the United States was founded. As you know, this is a country of immigrants. A few years back, I was sitting in an immigration office to obtain a green card. I looked up at the wall and read a plaque. It was a quote from Ronald Reagan, which read, "We draw our people, our strength from every country and every corner of the world." And I have to tell you, it felt like Ronald Reagan was talking just to me. When I moved to Johnson City 6 years ago, in my first few weeks here, I met a man for coffee. He's a self-made guy and a highly influential person in the region. The first thing he asked me about was my background. So I told him the story I just told you about my parents fleeing Uganda. And in return, he told me that in 1972, he was a cargo plane pilot who delivered food and other goods to the refugees fleeing the Ugandan border into neighboring Kenya. I was stunned. Here I was, the new guy in East Tennessee, shaking the hand of a man who had helped my people thousands of miles away, even before I was born. Now, that's what I would say is Southern hospitality. But honestly, it was incredible to realize that complete strangers can be so deeply connected. I'm here tonight because we all have one story on our minds. It's a story that weighs on my heart. And I would say that it's because of my family's history or my own story as a US immigrant, but I'm not sure it's really those things. We may come from different backgrounds, religions, even political persuasions, and I think this story is weighing heavily on your hearts too. Down at the US border, refugees who are only seeking shelter from harm have been piled into cages. Families have been separated. We know that some of the children have died. And when they died, we know that they were sick and that they were probably frightened, that many of them were alone. Think about that. As someone who works with stories every day, I can tell you that even if the camps are closed tomorrow, this is a story that we'll be talking about and unpacking for a very long time. But in the meantime, it is my hope and belief that we can find a way to work together to show the world that this story does not represent who we are in the United States of America. In the name of the woman who carried me home to my mother all those years ago after I was knocked off my bike, I am asking you tonight to join me in doing whatever you can to help reunite these families, whether that be to volunteer, to organize, protest, to make a donation, or just even to pray. In the name of my parents' adopted home in England, the Pale Brits, who took in my brown mum and dad in that first English winter and made them Sunday roasts and cups of warm tea, I ask you to join me tonight in looking for ways to offer these families a helping hand. They have been wrongly and unlawfully imprisoned, and I believe they deserve our welcome, not our fear. And finally, in the name of you here, my neighbors, colleagues, and friends who have made me feel at home here in East Tennessee, I am here to remind you of something you already know. We don't stand to lose anything by helping others. Kindness is not a form of weakness. It's more like a superpower. And every time we use it, we grow stronger. Thank you, God bless you, and may peace be with you all. Now, cultivating personal story is always important to do because we can use it to advocate and to develop our ability to support those people that we care about and the causes that we're part of. I liken storytelling for Star Wars fans out there to the Jedi Force. It can be used both for good and for bad. As all of us that care about creating a fairer and more equal world, I believe we must use story as a force for good, for binding community. The personal narrative is your truth, and it can connect with other people's values. True change, after all, can't be imposed. It must be felt in the heart. What I would like to do now is a short meditative exercise. And this is a way to help us to find those stories of self and stories of value. I invite you just to sit comfortably, close your eyes. I want to invite you to go to your childhood, your home, your youth, or upbringing. Go as comfortable as you feel. Home doesn't have to be a physical structure. It can be a place or a community, a feeling of connection to who you are, a people or even a person that is important to you. You are standing by the entrance of the door of your home, a home that felt connected to, safe, whichever that might be. Take notice of the surroundings. Notice the colors, the smells, if there are any. What type of ground or surface are you standing on? What does it feel like? Rough or smooth, soft or hard? When you look up, what do you see? A sky that is blue or a sky that is dark? What time of day is it? Is there movement? Are there any other living creatures? Where have you just come from? Take notice of what you are wearing. What color are your shoes, your pants? When you feel comfortable to do so, you can go inside that home. Take notice of the entrance. Notice the colors and the textures. As you go into the home place, what does it smell like? Who's there? If there was someone you grew up with that really inspired you, a grandparent, a parent, or a mentor, then go meet them. I want you to move to a moment in your childhood also that helped you think differently, that made you think differently about the world and your place in that world. If you were to draw from a moment that keeps you grounded, perhaps, that helped you give you direction, purpose, and meaning, that broaden your perspective of the world and your place in that world, perhaps a moment that connected you to become a citizen of the world and not just of one nation. Are there any moments that inspired you to want to make a difference? Perhaps a thought or an idea or an actual event or interaction? Something you were directly involved in or something you observed from a distance and made sense of later? If you could twiddle your toes or soak your feet into the earth, into that moment or place, where is the intimacy of life for you? Stay in that moment for a few moments. Visualize it. Observe those moments. Paint the image. Fill in some details. Why is it important to you? How has it shaped you into the person you are today? What you do? The movements you are a part of? Not just what you do, but why did it give you a desire to want to make a difference? If there is a value or a lesson in that moment, what is it for you? Finally, when you think about the issues and concerns in the world of today, the issues that you care about as part of your work, as part of the broader movement for social change that you care about, what values from your personal story of self that you were taught or learned is in conflict with that value? Thank you. You can open your eyes, or you can gently open your eyes. In both the Sikh, of which I am, and the Buddhist tradition, you may see the images of a half-closed eye, half open. We believe that we're always in a state of prayer and meditation, but we're also open of our eyes to injustice in the world. And so our role is to kind of cultivate the home inside to be able to activate, to do justice in the world. The idea that when you have the potential to be able to use that story of home to connect with the issues that you care about. And it may not happen overnight. It's not going to happen right now. It takes practice. So I encourage you to go deeper beyond this workshop and to go deeper into that and start to think about the weaving. Remember, stories begin in the imagination. They don't have to have all the details. They're just vignettes. They're blurry. But when we practice and we think about cultivating them, crafting them, writing them down, then we begin to craft the story that we want to tell, that we can tell, that advocates for the causes that we care about. France has the Eiffel Tower, India, the Taj Mahal, England, the Tower of London. But here in the United States, we have the humble kitchen table, the best form of storytelling, the cena americana, the potluck dinner. When we invite people to our kitchen tables, we do so to build fellowship and understanding, to hear their truths. And when we invite to other people's kitchen tables, we go with respect and with gifts. I want you to consider storytelling as the kitchen table. In the work that you do, the best form of storytelling is that call and response tradition. It's the sharing. It's the creation of stories together. It's the fellowship. If we're going there to impose or to change someone's way of thinking, perhaps we shouldn't be there. Let's invite people in and have that and think about those kitchen tables as metaphors in different parts of our society, in our practice, in our work, in our lives, in our communities. The great American storyteller Sid Lieberman once said that storytelling isn't about technique, it's about being fully human, the kitchen table. And the matriarch for storytelling in this country, Catherine Tucker Windham from Selma, Alabama, talked about storytelling. What it really does, essentially, is teach us to listen and to listen in new ways. Because listening leads to understanding, understanding leads to connection, and connection leads to peace. I'm shortly about to close, but I want to close with a few points. Michelangelo, the great Italian Renaissance painter, painted the 16th chapel. But we know when he painted the 16th chapel, he didn't learn to paint in a 1-hour workshop on how to paint. He learned composition, color theory. Then he mixed the paint up. Then he applied his soul. It took him 4 years to complete, but even then he considered it a work in progress. What you have today, I hope, is the beginning of a palette. And each color, red, blue, yellow, green, are the vignettes of your home and your values, of your experiences and the moments that help you see the world differently, that led you to do what you do today. It's up to you now to take that and paint the picture, your masterpiece. It could be in a short period, it could take a lifetime. I want you to also think about stories not just as a beginning, middle, and end, but really as a tapestry, as a narrative, and do justice to the full story that needs to be told. Jewish anthropologist Barbara Meinhof suggests that we're not just Homo sapiens, we are Homo narrans. Narrative is part of our DNA. It is core to the call and response tradition that exists in all our communities, in ourselves, and the rhythm that has the potential to be cultivated to enable all of us to be storytellers in our work and in our lives. In every profession, if you want to run a marathon, for example, we must run every day. If you want to be a writer or an author, you must write every day. If you want to put stories into your work, you must tell a story every day, large or small. But I guarantee you, once you start putting at the beginning of your work, bring that kitchen table into your practice, even a little bit, I guarantee you will start to see differences. Because if you remember, the greatest force in the universe is the power of thought, but the greatest means to communicate that thought is through story and imagination. Your imagination is the birthplace of all stories. When you think about the possibilities of using stories in your work and life and creating the masterpiece story you wish to create, perhaps over a lifetime. And what you imagine, what you manifest through story has the potential to become a reality and ultimately shape the movement and the causes that you care about. Thank you all for listening. It's a pleasure to be with you all.
Karen, thank you so much. And I hope you're sticking around because we'll invite folks to ask questions and talk a little bit later. We invited our next 3 speakers to share their perspectives on storytelling. They come from 3 different areas. Our first is the parent center perspective. Then we're going to hear from a state agency perspective, and then finally a practitioner. So first, I want to hand the reins to Diana Oten. Diana, I'm going to hand it to you. So it's yours.
Thank you very much. And you can bring up my PowerPoint presentation. I just want to start by saying that I was so excited and happy to be invited to participate in this webinar because my whole life has been about the power of stories. I am both Cajun and Indigenous, and neither one of those backgrounds are written languages. It's all about stories. The history of my people is all from stories, and the life that I've lived has been a life where stories have featured in every aspect of the work that I've done, no matter what job I've had or the field in which I've been. Stories have been very important. Next slide. I love this quote: "The world is not made of atoms, the world is made of stories." Of course, the world is partly made of atoms, but really the most important part of the world is made of stories. Stories coming together create our societies, our communities, and our nation, as well as our world. And I think that this visual of the ship sailing on the ocean, talking about the world is made of stories, reveals that being a traveler in the world of stories is both exciting and scary. It can be very fulfilling, but also very frightening, because we're not always sure how our stories are going to be heard by others. But I think that it's really important to also understand the next slide, that if we're really trying to reach other people, and of course we can never accomplish anything without reaching other people. And if we really want to reach other people, it's important to know that stories are 22 times more memorable than facts alone. For some of us, it's even more than 22 times more memorable. And so if we really want to impact people, we can't just talk about the truth, as was said in our the previous presentation, but we also have to have the stories that really illustrate the truth in a way that people are more able to hear and understand and relate to it. I'm going to talk about the work that I have done at the SPAN Parent Advocacy Network, and that we all have done there. And in fact, most of the parent centers in our country started out at kitchen tables and telling their own stories to each other, doing that call and response, and deciding we need to do something to make a change, to make things better for parents of children with disabilities, so that their children can get what they need to be successful. So we started at kitchen tables telling stories to and with each other, and then have used stories throughout our history as parent centers, because stories really powerfully illustrate the strengths and weaknesses of existing policies, practices, and systems, and also highlight needed improvements. And stories do this for legislators, for administrative policymakers like state directors of special education, or vocational rehabilitation directors, or early intervention leaders. Also for individual providers, parent leaders, and the general public. Because really, making change is all about relationships. And stories are the way that we bridge each other's individual histories and beliefs and values, and develop the relationships that are needed to make the change that we're looking for. It's also true that stories can be tools for change, or tools to make a difference. To grant reviewers, for example, I put a story in front of every single section of most of the grant applications that I submit, a story that's relevant to what I'm talking about in the application, because stories are the way to people's hearts, and hearts are the way to people's minds and to change. So next slide. So we use stories as tools for change because stories can convey meaning. They can convey complicated meanings in ways that facts really can distort. They also help build empathy and community, and they motivate people to action. And there are some great research studies that have shown how stories are more motivational for people to change their behavior than facts alone, or even the law. And I'm a lawyer, so I really like the law. But I think even the law is all about stories. One of the most important things about stories is that they can engage both feeling, emotion, and logic and rationality. So we can use a story to gain entrance to somebody's mind and heart, and then share the specific facts or issues, things that we want to change. But if we do that first without telling the stories, then we're much more likely to run into people who are defensive and who are closed-minded, or who are not interested in hearing what we have to say. Stories can highlight injustice and create the case for change in ways that are more personal to the people who were trying to change their minds, so that they can make the change that we're looking for. And I love this definition of storytelling as a tool for social change: the purposeful use of a specific narrative form, a story, to present the lived experience of individuals or groups in a way that helps others perceive the reality of that experience. They provide windows into the impact of policies on people's real lives. Next slide. One of the most challenging things to understand as we become more self-aware is that we operate in society based largely on our own default perceptions of reality, as well as on those kind of societal meta-narratives from which we learn about people based on their age or their class or their race, their gender, their geography, their education, their legal history. As a person who was born a Cajun, who's been influenced by being a Cajun all of my life, including around storytelling, people have certain stereotypes about Cajuns that I no longer fit because I spent most of my life living in what one might call the Western world, outside of my small Cajun town of Golden Meadow on Bayou Lafourche in Lafourche Parish, Louisiana. But that's how we interact or try to understand people who are different from us. And those default perceptions of reality may be based on one or two experiences, or maybe based on media or other people's opinions, misses the boat. The more exposure that we as listeners have to stories from people that we consider other in some way, the more clarity we can gain about others' personal experiences. And in that process, our perception of others and our relationship to others changes. As listeners, we can question and evaluate the source of our ideas about others and whether those ideas are really valid. And by listening to stories and sharing our own stories, hearts can be opened, relationships are developed, and it gets people in the mood for understanding an issue more deeply and being willing to take the action that's needed in order to make the situation better for those others who are telling their stories because they need us to help change a system, change a policy, change a situation. Next slide. Good stories compel people to change. They change the way we feel because stories demand an emotional investment that facts and figures do not. It compels people to change the way we think because stories pique and hold our interest in ways that drive facts and figures do not. Good stories compel people to change the way that we act. They bring energy to the message. They make us ready to take action to make the change. And the way we behave. Stories cause us to take the action that is needed in order to make the story different, to make the story better for the storytellers who are suffering or who are facing challenges that are difficult for them to overcome. Next slide. So how do we use stories at SPAN as a parent training and information center, as a family-to-family health information center, as a Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health organization? How do we use stories as tools for change? So I'm going to give you some examples. Family resource specialists are the staff at SPAN that work directly with families, that talk to families and hear their stories and help connect them to the information and the resources and the tools that they need to make a change in their own lives. Every quarter, every family resource specialist that works with families at SPAN creates a vignette, a story of a family that they've been working with. A story that highlights a challenge, an issue, a problem, a concern, as well as potential solutions to address those problems and issues and concerns. And we share those stories, those vignettes, with funders, with federal and state agencies, with federal and state legislators, and the media. And two of the most important ways that we have done that and had significant impact was advocacy around the Affordable Care Act and around family-to-family health information center funding. So back when there was, the Affordable Care Act was only a glimmer in someone's eye, we created a family storybook about the barriers to accessing quality services for children with special healthcare needs in New Jersey. And we made sure we had a story from every county so that we could share those stories with legislators, both Democrats and Republican legislators in our state, to show them the ways in which families were struggling with getting the services that their children needed. The family who had exhausted their lifetime health insurance benefits before their child even left the early intervention system, for example. We shared the family stories and their pictures with all of the legislators from the congressional delegation in New Jersey, and had 100% support for the Affordable Care Act, even among the Republicans, because the stories that the families from their own communities were telling highlighted for them a reality that they themselves had never experienced. A similar thing happened in Family to Family Health Information Center funding advocacy. It's a program that is not permanently established like parent centers are. But every quarter, I take the best vignettes and I share them with our elected officials, our congressional delegation, because that's who funds the Family to Family Health Information Centers. And those stories highlight the reason why Family to Family Health Information Centers are so important to families in their community, in their district, families who have children with special healthcare needs and disabilities. And we've been able to successfully, every few years, renew the legislation that establishes Family to Family Health Information Centers. And the last time around, we told stories from the territories because the territories had never had Family to Family Health Information Centers. And those stories that we shared from families in the territories led to Congress adding additional funds so that now every territory, as well as every state in the District of Columbia, has a Family to Family Health Information Center. Next slide. We also use stories through telling your story to make a change. We do training and follow-up support for family leaders about how they can tell their story to make a change, telling your story for a public policy purpose. And 3 ways in which that work that we did with families in New Jersey led to positive impacts is the statewide children's system of care for children with mental health and behavioral challenges, the statewide primary child provider and child psychiatrist consultation project, and community doulas. In each of these situations, we piloted work through small amounts of funding from foundations or even our own indirect funds or funds that we raised from grassroots fundraising. We piloted an initiative, and then we took those stories to the legislature, to the administrative officials in New Jersey, to the governor's office, and were able to get funding and laws to support the establishment of these 3 initiatives statewide, including Medicaid funding for community doulas in New Jersey, based on the stories from families and from providers that we were able to gather through those pilots that we started and then share with the appropriate decision makers, so that the stories that families and professionals who were working with those families told was so powerful and so emotionally engaging that people were moved to act. Next slide. We also use stories as tools for change in parent, leader, and professional development for our own staff. So for example, professional development for our own staff as well as other professionals. We worked with the University Center of Excellence for Developmental Disabilities in New Jersey to do parent-led screening training for professionals. We all know that seat of the pants screening doesn't work. What that results in is children not getting identified until even after early intervention, often not until 2nd or 3rd grade. But when you have parents tell a story about their one child who had evidence-based screening and got services early compared to an older child who did not have that screening and who was lost and did not get identified until much later, and you can see the life course trajectory that started by that, professionals were very moved and increased their use of evidence-based screening tools. These are federally qualified health centers, child care centers, and other places. We also use stories when we train our own volunteers, resource parents, and special education volunteer advocates. We use stories to help them begin to understand the lives and the reality of families other than themselves. Every parent comes to us with their own story, but they can't support families just by knowing their own story. And most recently, staff development on the child welfare system, so that our staff understand the implications of reporting a family to our Division of Child Protection and Permanency. We're all mandated reporters, and if we truly believe that a child is experiencing child abuse or neglect, we have to report that. But the stories that staff have heard from their own coworkers about how the child welfare system was used to intimidate or harass them because of their immigrant status, or because they wanted something different for their child with disabilities than the school system wanted. Those stories really make people take a second look to decide, is this really child abuse or neglect, or is this something else? Is this poverty? Is this racism? Is this family policing? So that we have very seldom have had to refer families to the child welfare system. Next slide. Some of the tools that we use in this work, we actually have developed some templates that can help families and our own staff tell stories in ways that are effective, that get to that my story, our story, and the issue. We have a template for stories from family resource specialists to make sure that they tell the story in a way that's most useful to help express the challenges that families are facing and the solutions that we're recommending. We have a family story guide and template for telling your story to make a change that we share with families. When we're preparing families to testify at our maternal and child health block grant hearings, there's a family story template that we use. We also have the Healthcare Family Storybook, and we use that Healthcare Family Storybook when we're creating other resources that we want to share with policymakers about changes that need to be created. Next slide. Some of the most important resources that I wanted to share, this one, the Storytelling as a Catalyst for Systems Change, is great. Infographic, and there's a free download guide to nonprofit storytelling. 0 to 3 has a wonderful resource on how to advocate through stories. SPAN, we have a SPAN Stories project where families and professionals can tell their stories on our website. And then I just put in some YouTube stories about parent and self-advocate stories about autism and childcare, the school district use of, can you go back, of child welfare to intimidate parents, how to make schools safe for LGBTQ plus youth, living deaf-blind in Iowa and developing self-advocacy skills in a child with deaf blindness. These are all great short YouTube stories. And these are all resources that I encourage you to take advantage of. I want to thank Cadre for inviting me to share my story about stories, and I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. So appreciate you taking the time today. And without any ado, I'm going to turn it over to Joanne. So Joanne, please go ahead.
We've heard some really inspiring stories and information about stories today. And when I was approached for this presentation, I took a more practical stance as to really how do we incorporate the use of stories into our systems. And next slide. Our system follows the Cadre dispute resolution Cadre continuum. We have for ever since we've been in existence for 18 years. And so when we look at developing our programs, we're looking at specific areas within the different stages where storytelling and the use of stories become very important. Next slide. So for early interventions strategies, one of the main things that we do is really focus on training about stories. We want school districts, we want parents, we want people to understand how they come up with these ideas that they have in their head. I think it's a new concept to them. And so we teach them how they are created. And almost all of the different types of training we use are based on a work by Chris Argyris. I felt like I should give him credit here. But we use that concept in our training. We train our neutrals about the creation of stories. We train our advisory council, our stakeholder training for parents, schools, It's all on our website. You want to go, I'm not going to spend time pointing it out, but you can go to our website under stakeholder training and Wisdom Wednesdays, and we have examples of trainings that we're doing where we're teaching about stories. Next slide. And the basic development of a story that Chris developed was that, and this is how we train parents, this is how we train school districts, is that when people experience something, they're collecting data from what they're observing. And to that data, they're adding meaning. Some of that meaning is perspective from their history, it's personal to them. So there's a lot of underlying issues that come towards that story. And a lot of times people make assumptions that are based on the story they've created. They draw conclusions and they develop beliefs about the world. So sometimes we get people who have a firm belief against the school district, for instance, and we have to deprogram that to find out where they've created their story. Where is that coming from? And this ladder of inference actually loops around in just nanoseconds. It's not something that we go through stages, but that we're collecting data, adding meanings, and we do it in nanoseconds. And then we may collect more information and change our stories. They're constantly changing. Next slide. In our prevention and disagreements stages, where we start to have contacts with people, we do have people in our center who answer the phone, who give out information about the services that we provide, who talk about the different things, hand out forms. But we have in our system a specific form of intake. And that intake is really a formal system component for us. And we spend a great deal of time listening to the stories that people are telling us. So I do a lot of the intake, and it would not be uncommon for me to talk an hour, 2 hours, 2.5 hours if the parents needed it. Next slide. It does take a lot of time. It's not something that's quick. So it's real easy to hear about a person's story and say, yeah, okay, we'll set you up with a mediation. But we want to find out what's behind that story. What is their story? What are those hidden assumptions, their judgments, their fears? What other embedded stories are in there to help people really understand where that person may be coming to? And I always acknowledge their story, because to them, it is the truth. Now, I do begin asking questions. I wonder why. I wonder if there could be other reasons, to set up the stage that there could be more to the story that they're not aware of. Next slide. This is an example. I have in this PowerPoint 3 scenarios, but time doesn't allow us to really go through it. So I've chosen this one. This is a very common call that I may receive every year, several times, more than several, where I talk to the educators call, the school calls, and they'll say to me, we're so frustrated. This parent doesn't even care about this kid anymore. I mean, they never come to conferences. They're doing terrible in their grades. We don't know how he's going to pass. We're just struggling to get him passed through. But oh boy, that kiddo is not eligible for sports anymore. And we get the raging phone call from a parent. Then I call the parent and I hear a sadder story where they say, man, oh, my child has a learning disability and he really struggles with math and reading. And he just struggles. I have a learning disability and I just really struggle with even how to help him with his math. And he hates school. He hates it. I worry that he's going to drop out. He's getting to high school. I'm getting to a point where I can't control what happens. I'm worried about his future. Will he be able to get a job? I mean, how bad are things going to be for him? And that fear is coming out. Their feeling of inadequacy in helping that parent is coming out. And then they will say to me, baseball is really all he cares about. And now that he's ineligible for baseball, I'm afraid he won't go back at all. And I don't know what else to do. So between those two stories, you can see that there's much the school district has to discover behind the story that the parent is telling. They need to understand the fear that that parent is having, the worry, the fact they don't know how to support their child anymore. Oftentimes, parents will tell us that when they go to school, they don't feel people are listening to their story or having empathy for what's going on. So we talk to the parent, and you see with the parent so much fear. So we need to set this up and ask questions so that educators are willing to perhaps be ready to go in and create a new story for this child. So the parent hasn't been able going to conferences. So what could we do to obtain parent support? What can we do to bring parents into the fold? So the school has their story, the parent has their story, and sometimes they're just very insulated. And we have to figure out a way that we can get them talking and creating a new story for them all to move forward with. Next slide. Just skip the next two. I put some other examples of kind of common calls where there's such a discrepancy in the story, and you would be able to look at them, I think, and tell. Now, when I'm doing intake with them, after I listen to their stories and I really ask questions and explore where they're coming from, and they'll tell me about their history. They may have had a bad history in special ed. They may have a disability. Schools will tell me how frustrated they are when teenagers don't want to be in school anymore and they don't know how to motivate the child. All indications these people really need to talk. And so we acknowledge both of their stories, and we talk about, I wonder what story the school what story is the school going to tell you about your child? What story do you think the parent will tell you about your child? And we ask them if are they ready to listen, to spend some time without trying to respond and just listen to the concerns of both sides and see if then they are really willing to move forward, talk, and create a new story for that child moving forward. Next slide. My story. I had to end this. I think this is probably the part of the job I like the best. I've been doing this particular position for 18 years, getting close to retirement. And I think more than anything, this is what I'm going to miss. Listening to people's stories, the fear between what's driving the school. The school oftentimes have fears about what's going to happen. The school's concern. Schools oftentimes feel isolated, that they don't know how to solve a problem, but they've not reached out to try to work with the parent. They don't know where to turn and they feel helpless. And this goes for schools as well as parents. They find that when they're talking, there's really a resource there that can bind them and really help them come up with solutions together. They oftentimes discover in their discussions of their stories solutions they didn't know they had, and offering supports in a way that can make that story better for the child and a more successful outcome. So giving parents and schools that story of hope, that this can be better, that we can explore each other's points of view to figure out what might be missing pieces to that story and how we can build it forward for that kiddo for a better outcome. It makes my job worth every minute. Mine was short and fast, wasn't it?
Did a great job, man. Thank you so much. And next I want to introduce Mark Purchin. So bring it home, Mark.
Thanks. And could we take off the screen just for one moment, just for a couple minutes? Just would love to see everyone. There you all are. So how I will, be the caboose. I'm so humbled to bring this home, and it's good to see all your faces and to create new stories. So I have a question for you. How many of you have ever heard the expression or been told, "Don't take it personally"? How many of you have ever received that or gotten that? And for so many of us, this is personal. And so to follow Kieran's just opening as far as just my story, and I won't do the 3-minute elevator pitch, but I'll give you the 20,000 word or less story that I have not rehearsed, but I got into this field, as Melanie said, that so my field right now is to create safe space as a neutral mediator and facilitator for families and mostly school districts and charter schools to be able to move forward. And for me, I had an IEP growing up, and through the whole process, my parents, my mom in particular, was a great advocate. UCLA told my parents at age 2.5 that I wasn't going to speak. I wasn't going to be able to graduate from a comprehensive high school, and luckily they said, yeah, no, thank you, or just been able to create their own story. And through the years, though, and growing up, being just going through the process of having parents advocate, seeing the school system work, felt that that professionally, and I kind of fell into this, but it was kind of my quote unquote calling, was that I could be an advocate for the child, for the student, by really being an advocate for the process and to being able to create that safe space. And so was a state mediator in the state of California for many years, and I don't know, worked with DDA, the Department of Disabilities, and office, the Special Education Hearing Office at the time in California, and mediated over 2,000 cases. And in all the cases that I worked with, even if there were lots of different viewpoints and quote unquote versions and of stories, I never felt anyone ever lied to me. It was the truth, the way that they see it, and the truth of their experience. And I think it's so important to really honor that. I view relationships, and for those of you who've heard me before, will say that I view relationships between school districts and families very much like a marriage. And statistically, whether we like it or not, they're a lot longer than most marriages. And even successful ones have tweaks, and we need to be able to work things out. And we need to be able to tell our story, and everyone has a story. And ideally, how many of you have ever been to an IEP meeting? Okay, great. Ideally, this is not, that's not the time that, maybe there's some time for a little story, but hopefully we're beginning the storytelling and getting the background beforehand, before the meeting. So I just have a few minutes. I want to show a very brief clip of an IEP it was a virtual IEP. This is a simulation, and this is for Rusty. And although this is a simulation, this was never rehearsed or anything. And I'm just going to show you the clip of where Fran Goldfarb, who's to my left, and she plays the behavioralist, and Susan Snyder, who plays Rusty's parent. They are doing introductions, and let's just watch and see, when you think of storytelling, what might be missing or telling.
I don't hear any sound either.
So I didn't seem like the sound was working. So basically what the piece was is that there was some folks needed to be dismissed at this IEP, and Fran, who again was playing the behavioralist, says, I think we should finish introductions first. And she said, so I'm Fran Goldfarb, I'm the behavioralist, and I know that we're talking today about behavior. And Susan had a reaction, who played Rusty's mom, and said, that's actually, we're talking about Rusty, we're talking about my child. and there was, you know, some very strong emotions when we narrow that topic. And so I'm sorry that there wasn't sound, and hopefully, perhaps in the slides, we can make sure when we share this that there is sound for this, so you could go back and be able to listen to it. But again, just the importance of creating that trust and that safe space. And it's all about really, being able to establish that trust and to be heard. The in California, the Department of Education, when McGeorge School of Law had the contract, there was over 3,000 filings in, I think it was 2005. And they did a questionnaire to parents, what caused you to file? Why did you file for due process? And the number one reason wasn't that the schools didn't give them the one-to-one aid or a different school. It was that they didn't feel heard. And so the importance of being able to, everyone has a story, whether it's the parent, the teacher. So many of us have gotten into our roles for very personal reasons. And what we want to do is honor the stories of the past, and then hopefully as a team, as one team, even though it may not always feel that way, that we're creating new stories. And what kind of team and what kind of stories do we want to be able to tell? And so just know that in the slides, one of the things that is a resource for you is that I ask lots of different questions in order for people to be able to tell their stories. And so there is a link to just sample open-ended questions to really encourage conversations, to encourage being able to have open dialogue. And because this is a panel and I'm caboosing it, we're so excited to have some time now to have some questions and dialogue and answers with my fellow panelists and all of you. So thank you, Padraig, for having me.
That was my fault. Mark, do you want us to put your PowerPoint back up and show the slides?
Oh, we could just show that maybe the important, yes, just where there's a link, but you'll be getting it too, so it's all good. But just thank you. So coming from curiosity is important, and to be able to to really have the questions. And Frank Goldfarb and I created this training as far as putting the I back in team, because and that's ironic because I is not in team, right? There's no I in team, but we say that everyone is an individual, everyone's a member of the team, and everyone has a story to tell. And we need to hear about all that. So yeah, I think we're good, and this allows a few minutes for questions for all of us.
Mark, I want to just ask you a quick question. I have heard, and I have not seen this practice done in IEP meetings, but the value of placing a child who is not attending an IEP meeting, but of putting like a picture of a student in the IEP meeting, or having some way of having the student represented even if they're not there. Have you seen that in practice, or have you got something that's very similar that you would recommend?
Yeah, so I do. Those are great questions. So I do two things. One is yes, I always ask for a picture of who we're talking about, realizing that for many folks who are not the parents in the room, go to lots of different meetings, are part of lots of different teams. And we want to make sure that each meeting, each experience, each team is personalized. The other thing that I always do to create the story is that in the beginning of the meeting, I'll ask everyone to go around the room, and just using imagine that the student's name is Rusty. And I want you to visualize Rusty right now. And what's the first positive word when you visualize Rusty, when you're thinking about your student, when you're thinking about your child? What's the first word that comes to your mind? And I always like to start the meeting that way, with each person being able to just really have that focus and setting that stage. So I recommend that.
Seems to be something that's addressed in the chat. Folks are talking about it's a deficit in the rushed IEP process that creates problems that wouldn't exist if there was more time.
Absolutely. And, you know, we need the time for storytelling, for our experience and for building up. And so happy to talk offline with anyone, but it's important to we don't have to buy into the rushness. You know, sometimes I say, you know, sometimes you hear, we only have an hour, let's go as fast as we can, let's speed it up. And I try to take another approach where, oh, we have an hour. Okay, so we're going to make sure that we really focus on what we're doing. And, you know, if we need more time, let's go ahead and we'll pull out our calendars and we'll, you know, plan another meeting. But again, I think given the lens, when we're thinking in the role of parent, and you know what caused a parent to get upset and such, and it's being not able to be heard or not being able to tell their story. And think, if you're not a parent and you're watching this webinar right now, you know, what gets you upset? What gets you mad in any situation? Is it that you didn't get something specific, or that someone didn't get to take the time to really understand and get you and to hear your story? And I would argue the latter.
Diana, you had a comment in the chat regarding the protocol for collecting stories. I wonder if you could address that.
Yeah, so somebody had asked about protocols for collecting stories with personally identifiable information. And so we actually have a process. People, you know, anybody who wants to can go to our website and tell their story. And by doing so, the website indicates that they're giving us permission to use the story. But we also collect many stories in our daily work. And we actually have a protocol for how we both collect and use that information. So if we are intending to use the information in any way that could potentially reveal the personal identity of the parent or the student or the professional, we will ask their permission in order to do so. Sometimes if you're talking about a situation in a very small district, for example, you really can't tell much details about that story because it would reveal who the family is. But usually you can, if the family doesn't want you to actually use their name, and sometimes they are. I mean, when we did the healthcare advocacy storybook, families gave us permission to use their names because it was so important to them. But usually you can tell the story, you can share the story in a way that doesn't reveal who the family is if they have a concern about doing that. I think one of the things that we do talk with families about when we are doing things like telling their story to make a change is letting families know that when people can put the story and the face and the human beings together, that's really powerful. And letting people know that we will be there to support them if something you know, happens as a result of their sharing their story. But we've had great success in people giving us permission to share their stories, including their personally identifiable information. And Roberta, when you say the difference between storytelling and testimony, I'm just telling you that we don't do testimony without stories. Testimony is only meaningful if it includes stories, because stories are at the base of what makes the listening, whether it's whatever policymaker it is that you're telling the story to, or the public, ready to hear what you're sharing and ready to be moved by what you're sharing in a way that can have the impact that you want. So.
Karen, would you like to speak to that question as well regarding the difference, if you see any, between storytelling and testimony?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can't speak from from this particular sector because, I'm not deeply in it. But I think, storytelling is a very broad idea. I mean, as a folklorist, we would say there are multiple ways we share our stories. It's not always in the oral tradition. It's the way we decorate our front porches. It's the stickers we put in our cars. It's the recipes passed on from our grandmother. It's telling the world who we are, where we come from. It's a very broad idea. And storytelling can also include the folk narratives as well. That are part of our traditions, or the cultural narratives. But testimony I would say probably perhaps more relates to the personal narrative. And I think there is a lot of power in I think also it depends on how is something more impactful than another? I think that always relies on the listener. The final interpreter to any story is always going to rest in the mind of the listener. But I think what happens in today's world, when a personal testimony is shared, I think we do gravitate to it. It's your truth, and we want to understand what your truth is and what your experiences are. And I think that's really important. And I think, in many ways, when we scroll our phones, we're searching for the testimony. We're searching for the truth. We're searching for the human story. When there's a war, a conflict, a massacre in a school, we search our phones. We're scrolling, but we're constantly searching. And we're trying to get closer to that truth, And I think humans have that desire. And, after 9/11, when all visitor attractions declined in New York City, they increased in one place, and that was the Metropolitan Museum's Islamic galleries. People realized that they needed to hear for themselves, and they tried to find that connection, search for that truth. Hence, they can both be very powerful. Folk tales can be incredibly powerful because a folk tale is also a personal narrative for an entire culture. When you think about the African-American Brer Rabbit stories or the cultural narratives, they're incredibly powerful over a period of time as well.
So personal narratives or testimony adds weight to statistics. It adds weight to facts and figures, and it persuades in a different way. And that's what I'm hearing is that the importance of both in policy making, and that they persuade differently.
Yeah, I feel really uncomfortable with stories to persuade, though. That I have to be upfront. I think storytelling is core to our humanity, and there's something. I think we have to be really careful about the idea of using storytelling to convince others. The idea to broaden a perspective, to connect, and to build that empathy foundation, I think is really important. But I think
sharing and humanizing.
Correct. And we have to be, we have to also remember that, storytelling it's a profession, but it's core to the origins began in Africa. When we think about the art of storytelling, it was always an indigenous and an ancestral collective mutual aid concept. It's only until modern times it's been really sort of capitalized. It's been used by companies to frack. It's been used to dispel, to manipulate, to take us to war. So that's why I say it's really a sacred art form, and we have to be very conscious of how we are using it to persuade.
In the interest of time, and that we're 1 minute to close, I think that's a wonderful way to end this in this webinar, is the importance of the sacred of storytelling. Manny, if you could open up the PowerPoint again. I want to thank our panelists, Kieran, Diana, Mark, Joanne. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been rich. This has been powerful. We're deeply, deeply grateful. Great discussion. Please, if you would, do fill out the survey evaluation. It's important to us. We rely upon those heavily, and we look forward to seeing you all again in future webinars, and have a most wonderful start to the school year. So bless you all. Thank you very much.